Welcome to the Right News Network.
Hello and welcome. I'm Emma with the headlines that matter most right now. President Trump is raising the stakes in trade tensions with Europe, announcing sharply higher tariffs on cars just days into his term. Our Washington correspondent Marcus Webb has this. Marcus?
Well, Emma, what we're seeing here is Trump making good on his campaign promise to get tougher on trade. He's bumping tariffs on EU cars and trucks from 15% up to 25%, effective next week. He's claiming the Europeans aren't complying with a deal they made last July, though he hasn't really spelled out exactly what they're doing wrong.
Does Trump have legal authority to do this unilaterally, or is this going to face a court challenge?
Look, that's the real question right now. The Supreme Court already shot down his reciprocal tariff plan earlier this year, so there's real uncertainty about whether this passes legal muster. What's interesting is we don't even know the legal justification he's using yet. But here's the thing. The EU has already warned they could blow up the whole trade deal if he keeps doing this, which means we're probably headed for a real trade war with our closest allies.
Marcus, appreciate it. Remaining with world news, the standoff between the U.S. and Iran is now affecting markets and energy prices globally. Our Middle East correspondent, Layla Nazari, has more on the stalled peace talks. Layla?
Well, Emma, thanks. So President Trump rejected Iran's peace proposal earlier this week, saying it contains terms he simply can't accept. The thing is, he hasn't actually explained what those terms are. What we do know is that Iran's dealing with serious internal disagreement right now, and that's making it really difficult for their negotiators to move forward. Meanwhile, shipping through the Strait of Hormuz is getting more and more risky, which is driving oil prices up across the world.
What are Congress members saying about all this?
Look, Republican lawmakers are getting frustrated. We're now past the 60-day mark, and some of them are pushing for Congress to actually step in and set some kind of deadline or conditions on Trump's war powers. There's real concern that this operation doesn't have an end game, and with the midterms coming up, that's becoming a bigger political problem for the administration.
Layla, appreciate it. Still on world affairs now. One of the planet's most critical shipping lanes is at the center of a high-stakes standoff between Washington and Tehran. Layla is still with us. Layla, what is the latest on the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, Emma, what we're seeing right now is pretty extraordinary. The Trump administration just issued this warning telling shippers they absolutely cannot pay tolls or what Iran's calling donations for passage through the strait. But here's the thing, and this is the really interesting part. Trump said just days ago that America didn't need any help reopening this route. Now the administration's quietly reaching out to allies asking them to assist. It's a pretty dramatic reversal.
So Trump said they didn't need help, but they're now asking for it.
Exactly. Look, I think what happened is they underestimated just how difficult it would be to maintain control of this waterway. About a third of all the world's oil travels through there. The Iranians are holding firm on their position that the strait is their natural right, and they're not backing down. Meanwhile, we're hearing Tehran's actually put forward a new peace proposal to the U.S., so there's still diplomacy happening behind the scenes.
Thank you, Layla. Moving to the markets now, oil giants posted record profits this quarter, but they're defying pressure from Washington to pump more crude. Our finance editor, Sophia Reeves, has this. Sophia?
That's right, Emma. So Exxon and Chevron absolutely crushed earnings expectations this week. Exxon reported $4.9 billion in adjusted earnings, or $1.60 per share, way above the 98-cent consensus. Chevron did the same thing. The thing is, higher oil prices from those supply disruptions are filling their coffers without them having to lift a finger on production.
But the White House wants them drilling more to bring down gas prices. Why aren't they?
Well, here's the thing. These companies are saying that rushing into new projects doesn't make financial sense. Oil could drop tomorrow, and suddenly you've got expensive infrastructure sitting idle. They're focused on shareholder returns right now, not appeasing the administration. But look, this is becoming a real political issue heading into the election because voters care about what they pay at the pump.
Sophia, appreciate it. The oil market is experiencing a significant realignment as the United Arab Emirates breaks with OPEC to increase crude production, a move that could help lower global energy prices and shift market dynamics toward Western interests. While the UAE exits the cartel's quota system, Kazakhstan has chosen to remain committed to OPEC+, revealing cracks in the alliance's unity. Watch for other major producers to signal their own positions in the weeks ahead. Also on the world front, the Pentagon has struck classified AI deals with 7 major tech companies, including OpenAI, Google, and Microsoft, but notably excluded Anthropic from the agreements. The move comes as the Defense Department doubles down on diversifying its AI vendors, while tensions simmer over usage terms and military applications. Watch for accelerated deployment of these systems across classified networks throughout 2025. Also on the world front, the first direct commercial flight between the United States and Venezuela just touched down in Caracas, marking a dramatic shift in relations after years of diplomatic crisis. Marcus rejoins me now. Marcus, what's the significance of this moment?
Well, Emma, this is actually pretty historic. We're talking about the first commercial flight in over 7 years, and it's happening just 4 months after U.S. Special Forces captured Nicolas Maduro. So you've got both American and Venezuelan officials celebrating this as a new era, but honestly, there's a lot riding on whether this actually sticks or if it's just symbolic.
What are the real economic stakes here for both countries?
Look, Venezuela's economy is in freefall. They've been under heavy sanctions and isolated internationally for years, so reopening commercial aviation could be huge for them. We're talking potential trade, investment, even tourism. For the U.S., it opens access to Venezuelan markets and resources. But here's the thing. A lot of this depends on how stable the political situation actually is on the ground.
Marcus, appreciate it. The Iran conflict is creating an unexpected humanitarian crisis, a global fertilizer shortage that could leave billions without adequate food. Yara International's CEO warns that the world's poorest nations will be forced into an expensive auction for fertilizer supplies they cannot afford, threatening dramatic food shortages and price spikes across Africa and beyond. World leaders are now racing to prevent a catastrophic impact on global food security. In technology now, cloud computing infrastructure is facing new vulnerabilities that could reshape how companies store and process their data. Amazon Web Services is dealing with significant war damage in the Middle East, while major investors are racing to build their own data centers. Our technology correspondent Alex Park has more. Alex?
Well, Emma, Amazon's data centers in the Middle East took drone strikes, and the company's essentially frozen billing for customers there, because repairs are going to take months. We're talking about a major disruption for any business operating in that region that depends on AWS. They're stuck without reliable cloud services right now.
So how is the rest of the tech industry responding to this kind of vulnerability?
Look, this is actually a wake-up call. You're already seeing venture capital firms like Cotu buying up land near power sources to build their own independent data centers, reportedly for companies like Anthropic. What's interesting is, this suggests that big tech players don't want to bet everything on Amazon or other hyperscalers anymore. They want their own infrastructure, and they want it in places that aren't exposed to this kind of geopolitical risk. It's a huge shift.
Alex Park, appreciate the reporting. The aviation industry faces a major shakeup as budget carrier Spirit Airlines appears headed for shutdown. The Trump administration says it made a final bailout offer worth $500 million, but negotiations with the airline's bondholders broke down this week. We'll be watching to see if Spirit attempts one last restructuring deal or moves forward with liquidation.
Time to go deeper. Beyond the headlines, our full analysis of the story shaping the world right now.
It's Friday, and President Trump has just announced he's hiking tariffs on European Union cars and trucks to 25%, up from the current 15%, accusing Brussels of failing to comply with a trade deal that was only struck last July. This comes as the Supreme Court has already struck down Trump's broader reciprocal tariff framework, and as Europe warns the entire trade relationship with Washington could be in jeopardy. The stakes could not be higher for German automakers, for American consumers, and for a transatlantic relationship that is under more strain than at any point in living memory. Joining me now are Marcus Webb, our defense and security analyst, and Sophia Reeves, our economics and markets editor. Marcus, let me start with you. Is this Donald Trump playing hardball negotiation, or is he blowing up one of America's most important economic relationships?
Thanks, Emma. Look, let's be clear about what we're actually watching here. This is not destruction. This is accountability. The European Union signed a trade deal in July 2025, less than a year ago, and they're already in non-compliance. Trump isn't the one who broke the agreement. The EU is. And what I find extraordinary is the way the media, BBC, France 24, ABC Australia, all reach for the same framing. Poor Brussels, rogue Washington. Nobody asks the obvious question, which is what exactly did the EU fail to deliver? Germany has built an export economy on American market access, while spending decades contributing inadequately to NATO and Western defense. Emmanuel Macron talks endlessly about European strategic autonomy, while expecting American security guarantees and American consumers to subsidize European prosperity. Douglas Murray has made this point brilliantly. The EU is fundamentally a power-concentrating institution that operates by different rules for different players, and it has always assumed Washington would eventually back down. What Trump is demonstrating consistently is that he won't, and I'd argue the world is a more honest place for it.
But Marcus, here's my challenge to that. The Supreme Court already struck down Trump's reciprocal tariff framework this year. Doesn't that suggest even the American legal system thinks he's overstepping? And if Europe retaliates, aren't American consumers and businesses the ones who end up paying the price? Sophia, what's your take on this?
Well, look, Marcus isn't wrong about the EU's trade practices, but I think he's missing something critical about the mechanism here. The Supreme Court ruling matters enormously. You can't just wave that away. If the legal architecture for Trump's broader tariff strategy has been struck down, then applying a 25% auto tariff without clarifying the legal basis, as CNBC correctly noted, creates genuine uncertainty for businesses trying to plan. Here's what the data actually shows. The EU runs a goods trade surplus with the United States of over 155 billion euros. That asymmetry is real, and it's legitimate to address it. But a jump from 15 to 25% on auto tariffs hits European manufacturers and American consumers who buy those vehicles. A $50,000 German car just got $5,000 more expensive overnight. That's a real cost, and the risk of European retaliation, targeting American agriculture, American tech, American luxury exports, is not hypothetical. It's a playbook Brussels has used before.
I hear what Sophia is saying, but with respect, that misses the point entirely. We can't allow the perfect to be the enemy of the necessary. Yes, there are legal complexities. Yes, consumers pay some cost. But what's the alternative? More years of asymmetric trade while Brussels lectures Washington. Look at the historical precedent. Reagan used automotive pressure against Japan in 1981, and what happened? Japanese manufacturers built American plants. American jobs were created. Structural outcomes take time. The risk of doing nothing is higher than the risk of short-term friction. And let me be very direct. Germany's auto sector is already being hammered by Chinese EV competition. Volkswagen, BMW, Mercedes, they're all under pressure. Trump has found the most vulnerable pressure point at the most vulnerable moment. That's not reckless, that's strategic.
Here's what I want to know, and this is the question that keeps me up at night. We're 6 months away from potentially the most consequential trade restructuring in a generation. Where does this actually end? Does Europe capitulate? Does this escalate into a full trade war? Or does something else entirely happen? Sophia, where do you see this going?
The way I see this playing out, there are really three possibilities, and none of them are clean. The first is that Brussels blinks. They make enough surface-level concessions to give Trump a political win without fundamentally changing anything structural. Bureaucratic institutions like the EU are extraordinarily skilled at appearing to concede while actually conceding very little. And if that's what happens, we're back having this conversation in 18 months. The second is escalation. Europe retaliates against American agricultural exports, American tech firms, and the whole thing spirals at a moment when neither economy can afford it. The real risk here, to me, is that the European auto sector, particularly Germany, is already fragile enough that a sustained 25% tariff genuinely accelerates a crisis that's been building for years.
Here's what concerns me most, and this is where I think the long-term picture actually gets interesting. There's a third scenario that nobody's talking about enough. If Washington sustains this pressure consistently, it could force a genuine renegotiation of the entire transatlantic relationship from first principles. Europe has been talking about strategic autonomy for years without delivering it. If the era of automatic American market access in exchange for nominal partnership is genuinely over, European capitals face a choice they've been avoiding for decades: reform meaningfully or accept a diminished position in the American market. History tells us that real structural change in European trade policy doesn't happen from goodwill, it happens from pressure. The trajectory suggests this could be the moment that pressure finally produces something real, or it fractures the relationship entirely. Those are very different outcomes, and the decisions haven't been made yet.
Marcus Webb, Sophia Reeves? Brilliant, heated, essential. One thing's for certain, somewhere in Brussels tonight there's a trade negotiator staring at a spreadsheet wondering how they explain this to Berlin, and they don't have an answer. It's May Day 2026, and the streets are anything but calm. Turkish riot police have fired tear gas and arrested at least 570 people in Istanbul as demonstrators tried to reach Taksim Square. Meanwhile, in the United States, up to 600 organizations with links to communist groups, and reportedly to the Democratic Party itself, mobilized for their own May Day events. And in Jerusalem, Israeli police arrested a man after a French nun was assaulted in what authorities are calling part of a wider pattern of harassment of Christians by Jewish extremists. 3 stories, one day, one very uncomfortable set of questions about power, ideology, and where the West is actually heading. Joining me now are Sophia Reeves, our economics and markets editor, and James Chen, our geopolitical analyst. Sophia, let me start with you. Is this a coordinated global hard left moment, or are we reading too much into a single calendar date?
Thanks, Emma. Look, I'll be blunt. Anyone dismissing this as coincidence isn't paying attention. May Day is not a neutral holiday. It never has been. It is the ideological signature event of a movement that, in its most realized form, produced the Gulag, the Cultural Revolution, and the Killing Fields. When Douglas Murray talks about the West's extraordinary tolerance for communist symbolism compared to its zero tolerance for fascist symbols, he's identifying a moral double standard that has real political consequences. And those consequences are now visible in real time. You've got Erdogan, a man who has systematically dismantled press freedom in a NATO member state, arresting journalists on the grounds that they're likely to cause trouble. That's pre-crime policing. That should be on every front page. But here's the other side of that coin. While we're righteously condemning Erdogan, 600 hard-left organizations are marching through American cities in coordination with Democratic Party networks, and the same media that covers every conservative rally like it's an insurrection can barely bring itself to mention it. That asymmetry isn't accidental. It's the product of 30 years of ideological capture in our newsrooms.
But Sophia, isn't there a genuine distinction between American workers marching for better pay and actual communist agitators? Surely, not every May Day demonstrator in the U.S. is waving a Mao portrait. And James, what's your take on this? Are we conflating legitimate labor rights with something more sinister?
Well, look, Sophia's making a rhetorically powerful argument, but I think she's at risk of flattening some important distinctions. Here's what I think matters from an analytical standpoint. The documented organizational links between Democratic Party fundraising networks and these hard-left groups are genuinely newsworthy and genuinely underreported. I completely agree on that. But the Turkish story is actually the more immediately dangerous situation in geopolitical terms. Erdogan is pre-arresting journalists and opposition figures. That's not a culture war talking point. That's a NATO ally behaving like an authoritarian state. Turkey ranks 158th out of 180 countries on the Press Freedom Index. That's lower than some countries we'd consider outright adversaries. And when you've got a NATO member with control of the Bosphorus and critical alliance infrastructure sliding into one-man rule, the strategic implications are enormous. I worry that we spend so much energy on the domestic ideological battles that we miss the harder geopolitical chess moves happening in Ankara.
I hear what James is saying, but with respect, that misses the point entirely. Yes, Erdogan's authoritarianism is dangerous. But what's the solution? Is it the Marxist street movement that opposes him? Because that's the actual alternative being offered. The uncomfortable truth is that weak, ideologically compromised Western institutions have created the vacuum that strong men like Erdogan fill. You can't separate the domestic ideological rot from the geopolitical consequences. They're the same disease. And look, 600 organizations, 600, coordinated, documented, linked to a major American political party. If this were 600 groups linked to any right-wing movement, it would be the only story on television for a month. That double standard is not a minor media criticism. It is evidence of a system that has lost the capacity to apply its own stated principles consistently.
Here's what I want to know, and I want both of you to answer this honestly. Is the West actually capable of holding the line on any of this? On Turkey, on the hard left, on Jerusalem? Where does this go in the next 6 months, James?
The way I see this playing out, and I want to be careful here, because these are scenarios, not certainties, Turkey becomes an increasingly acute problem for NATO cohesion before the year is out. If Erdogan continues escalating domestic repression while simultaneously leveraging his strategic position to extract concessions from Washington and Brussels, you're going to reach a point where the alliance has to make a genuinely hard choice. Strategic convenience or stated democratic principles. History tells us convenience usually wins, and that's a dangerous precedent because it signals to every other backsliding democracy that NATO membership is a blank check.
Here's what concerns me most, and this is the scenario that keeps me up at night. The American left's organizational infrastructure has been building for a decade. The students radicalized in the 2010s are now the organizers, the local officials, the journalists. If that network continues deepening its coordination with openly Marxist groups unchallenged, because the media won't cover it and the Democratic Party won't distance itself, then by the 2026 midterms, you've got a situation where one of America's two parties has a radical activist base that is ideologically incompatible with the constitutional order. That's not hyperbole. That's a trajectory with historical precedents that should make everyone very uncomfortable.
Sophia Reeves, James Chen, a genuinely unsettling conversation, and probably not the last we'll have on this. One thing is certain, somewhere between Istanbul, Washington, and Jerusalem, the people in charge are hoping nobody's paying close enough attention. And tonight, at least, they're wrong.
That wraps up today's top stories. I'm Emma. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.